And good afternoon. It is Friday, and that means it's time for our Lunch and Learn. Now, today we're going to be talking about cultured meat. And I don't know why anyone would want to have cultured meat, synthetic meat, when we can have real meat. I don't know. I think probably I'm going to get, ruffle some feathers today, and I don't mean to ruffle your feathers. I just have a real sense that if we eat food that is real food, food that grows the way God intended it to grow, we're just going to be better for it. So a lot of times things will be approved by the FDA and different government agencies when they haven't really been tested. They haven't been tested on humans. They haven't had long-term testing. And this is why you'll see from time to time, and it's pretty often if you're paying attention, the FDA will do a recall on drugs. Drugs that were once available are no longer available because they have found that there are problems with the drugs. Now, they should have found the problems with the drugs before they approved the drugs, in my opinion. I mean, it's just like the whole smoking thing, right? Everybody today knows that smoking causes cancer. Smoking is not good for you. Smoking induces or introduces a lot of heavy metals, particularly cadmium, into the human body. We know that heavy metals cause all kinds of distress in the GI tract and in the brain. They can cross the blood-brain barrier, and so that is a problem. However, if you look at old advertisements from the 1950s, 1960s, doctors are advertising and advising people that smoking is a great way to calm your nerves, et cetera, et cetera. I've even seen ads that show a mother holding her baby with a lit cigarette in her mouth. And of course, we would never do that today because we have seen that something that once was approved in the past, now we know that it's very detrimental. And so it'd be really good if we had the policy, let's make sure it's really healthy for us. Let's make sure it's really good for us before we approve it. What are some of the things that have been approved that have not been pretty good for us? Well, one thing that we see all the time in the clinic is people that have had gastrosurgery. They've had the lap band, they've had the sleeve, they've had whatever they've had, right? That messes up the whole digestive process for the rest of your life. And so I don't know anybody who has had that surgery and lost the weight that was able to continue to maintain that weight loss after about 5 years. Almost everybody that I know, or I would say everybody that I personally know that has undergone that surgery has regained the weight and has digestive issues as a bonus for disrupting the natural ebb and flow of what goes on in the GI tract. So I just think it's a sad thing that medical people would think that it's okay to change your biology. And I'm talking about the way your body is supposed to work. All right, so to go in and to do the different surgeries, and there's too many for me to enumerate here, but it messes up the digestive process, and you cannot live a healthy life if you cannot digest your food properly, which brings us to some other things that help us with our issues, okay? So another thing that's been approved that we have now found is a big deal is vaping. People are saying that vaping is better than cigarettes. However, the new research that's coming out is showing that it is more toxic to the brain. The lungs are even worse than with cigarette smoking. So it goes on and on. Breast implants. It goes on and on and on. Things that were approved that now we have found detrimental to our lives. And so the question is, what could we do better as it comes to our food source? So it was just in the news that the Good Meat Company has lab-grown or cultured meat. It is cultured meat division of the Eat Just Inc. Inc. It recently received approval for the U.S. Food and Drug Administration to start selling its first product, which is cultured chicken, to the American public, okay? Very soon, for the first time in history, Americans will be able to eat chicken meat that isn't required to have been slaughtered or gone through all the different processes that chicken has to go, okay? Now, they're doing all of this saying that it is more nutritionally dense and it is not harmful to the environment, and that we're not, being inhumane to the chickens, and we're not adding to the carbon footprint and all that kind of thing. So the producers of lab-grown meat claim that their product is indistinguishable from the meat as we know it. Cultured meat isn't a copy or an approximation of meat. It is meat. Okay. The truth is that the new product differs in one fundamental aspect of the meat that we're used to eating, and that is the animal cells which grow this meat, all right, will replicate endlessly under the right condition, just like cancer cells, all right? So cancer cells are made up of immortal cells. They never die. As we grow, as we age, if we get sick, whatever, our cells are programmed with apoptosis, natural programmed cell death. This allows the body to get rid of tired cells, get rid of old cells, replicate, renew, and do all that kind of thing. With cancer, you've got immortal cells that never die. So this cultured meat is made up of immortal cells. So it is the same type of cells that are in cancerous tumors. Now, I don't know, there's no proof, there is no proof right now that you can get cancer from eating this food. This food is brand new. It's just been approved. We don't know if it's going to cause us problems. However, we do know that we do become what we absorb. If we happen to absorb an immortal line of cells, what is that going to do? Is it going to make us more susceptible to cancer? What is it going to do? We just don't know. There's no data out there. Okay, the manufacturers of this meat know that nobody's going to want what they call a cancer steak, right? Because it's got that immortal cell line. They don't want to talk about it, okay? There was a recent Bloomberg story, and I'll put the link in the comments that you can read that. They want to avoid the question. They don't want to answer it. And it's just like so many things that we've seen recently. When we've asked the hard questions, nobody wants to give us the answer. Why is that? Because we're not going to like the answer. Most of the lab-grown meats are made with what is known as immortalized cell lines, cells that either occur naturally or through the intervention such as exposure to radiation, genetic modification, or the use of an enzyme, and they replicate without end. Now, I don't know about you, but I don't want to eat meat that has been radiated. I don't want to do that. Radiation changes the way your cells behave. Radiation damages cells. I don't want to eat food that has been genetically modified. So I always look on the container, whatever it is, to make sure that it has the non-GMO label on there, because I don't want to be ingesting things that have been genetically modified. So the first use of the immortal cell line in medicine was mired in controversy in 1951. This cell line came from a cancerous tumor, right? And it is still alive today, and it is still being used in medical experiments today, all right? It was removed from a tumor of an African-American woman without her consent by Baltimore's Johns Hopkins Hospital, all right? It's often compared with the infamous syphilis study that Tuskegee University conducted, back in the day. They were unethical, right? And so this is something that, is it ethical for somebody to take DNA out of my body to use in medical experiments without telling me? It's something to think about, okay? Scientists like immortalized cell lines because they don't have to harvest new samples. All they have to do is just work with that one line to make sure it doesn't die, make sure it's got the right food, the right light, the right whatever, the right conditions so that it never dies. Recently, immortalized cell lines harvested from aborted fetal tissues were used in some vaccines that we all know and love. Not really love, but we all know about that, okay? And that's a big objection to the vaccines, is that they have the immortalized cell lines in them. The makers of lab-grown meat like the immortalized cell lines for the same reason scientists do. Once you've got the cell lines, you never have to take another sample of the animal again. This means, among other things, you can market the product as cruelty-free and suitable even for vegetarians and vegans. Now, I don't understand how they can say that, because if they're taking this immortalized cell line, we're going to say it's going to be a chicken. We're going to say that because we're making chicken, right? If we're taking that from a chicken, it's still a chicken. It may be synthetic chicken, but it's still a chicken. So I don't know how that's going to fly with vegans and vegetarians. I don't know, okay? The problem is that human beings, have no history of consuming cells that behave like cancer as part of their diet, right? In the past 200,000 years of our history, all right, we are likely to have consumed cancerous tissue only by accident and never intentionally, all right? So most reputable meat dealers, if they get I'll say a carcass, right? Because we know that it goes to the slaughterhouse and they kill it and they hang it and they do all the things that they do. If they get a carcass that's riddled with cancer, most reputable producers will throw it out. There have been some stories of the cancer parts just being cut out and the rest of the meat sold. I think that has happened in some cases. I don't think it's very usual. I think it's quite rare. However, we don't have any history of what happens when we eat meat that has cancer cells in it. So I was doing some research on this, and there is research out there that shows what we eat can pass through the GI tract, get, and the fragment of the DNA, both animal and vegetable, can get into our DNA. So there's research out there. It's not easy to read. It's not pretty to read, but there is research out there that shows that what we eat actually passes and becomes part of our DNA because we just absorb it that way. It used to be thought that we would eat something, masticate the food, digestive enzymes, all that kind of stuff, so everything was broken down into usable nutrients. It has been scientifically proven that fragments of DNA can cross over into our blood and we pick up that DNA. So the question is, what happens when we eat an immortalized cell that has no programmed cell death, and that becomes part of our DNA? Is that going to make cancer more prolific? We just don't know. We just don't know. It says, the article says, it's not just an image problem for lab-grown meat, which is part of the alternative food segment, all right? It already has to do with deeply unfavorable attitudes among the general public. Numerous studies and opinion polls have already revealed that given a choice, the majority of consumers do not want to eat products like plant-based meat or plant-based milk. Now, I will tell you, almond milk is good, coconut milk is good, rice milk is good. So all of those things are good. Those are natural products made from crushing the seed, crushing the coconut, and that kind of thing. And so we're not talking about something that is synthetic. We're talking about something that is processed from the actual raw material. Plant-based meat, and I laugh when I see these articles or the advertisements that say it tastes just like meat. Well, if it's going to taste just like meat, why don't you just eat meat? Okay, so I don't care if you're vegetarian. If you want to be vegetarian, knock yourself out. I'm a Texas girl. I like my red meat. I like it a lot. I don't want you messing with my meat. I don't want to do plant-based meats because why would I do a synthetic when I can have the real thing, right? We have a farmer that we support who raises her animals ethically, raises them sustainably. and there's no hormones, no antibiotics, and that kind of thing. And so that's what we choose to eat. I would not want a plant-based meat. I just would not want that. There's a lot of vegetarian options in the grocery store that are made from soy. In the United States, soy is like 95% genetically modified. And so for that reason, we don't recommend it. Soy has a lot of phytoestrogens in it. Phytoestrogens affect a woman's thyroid and affects her ovaries because it is the xenoestrogens, okay, the synthetic estrogens, false estrogens, but your body picks it up as estrogen. So what happens when we have too much estrogen? That gives rise to different female cancers, right? So we don't want to do that. So we don't recommend soy products. We don't recommend vegetarian products made with soy. That's my perspective, all right? In a recent study, 73% of Australian men said that they would rather use 10 years of their lives than to give up meat, okay? And that's probably, I can say that I would be the same, right? I would not want to give up meat. Now, if I had to go to a plant-based diet, and I have gone more plant-based as I've, gotten older and different things just because it is more healthy, but I still enjoy real protein. My body just feels better when I eat protein. Some people aren't like that. We're all different. We all have different nutritional needs. But I know for me, as a single human being, right, I just feel better when I eat protein. So some smaller producers of lab-grown meat are now trying to use technologies other than immortalized cell lines because they know that cancer can only be a disastrous association with food. It's unclear whether they will be successful or not. However, the big three companies, Good Meat, Upside, and Believer, continue to plow on with their use of this technology, the immortal cell lines, okay? Both Good Meat and Upside have managed to convince the FDA that their products are safe to eat. Now, we don't have any long-term studies to know what's going on, so we don't know. I don't know how they made that determination that lab-grown meat is safe to eat when we just don't know. It is already being served to paying customers and a number of different venues, from upmarket restaurants to street sellers, all right? While the scientists Bloomberg interviewed for their piece on lab-grown meat said they don't believe eating immortalized animal cell lines could actually give you cancer, we just don't know. And I've read several reports, and no one thinks that if you eat this meat, you will get cancer. Remember back in the 50s, no one thought that if you smoked cigarettes, you would get cancer, right? No one thought that if you did this, you would get cancer. And so what we need to do is have a wait and see perspective to see actually what this happens. All right, there's no history of the consumption of such products in our dietary history stretching back hundreds of thousands of years, okay? So there's no long-term safety data. The cancer threat cannot be dismissed, okay? The Italian government, yay for them, is taking the threat seriously enough that they are banning lab-processed meat as part of a wider move to prevent adulteration of the Italian food supply. So it has to go through their parliament. It has to go through all their, governmental things, whatever that means. But at least they are saying, we don't want this technology. We don't want this food in our environment. Now, I've said this before, and when back in the day when my babies were young, their daddy was an Englishman. And so we lived in Scotland and we lived in England. And food is much different over there than it is over here. But I remember when we came back to the United States in 1991, and there were these great little cookies, and they were chocolate fudge cookies, and they were fat-free. And I was so excited because outside of beef, I love chocolate the most. And so it was a fat-free variety, which means it didn't have many calories and it wouldn't cause you to gain weight. And so I went to the store and I bought them and I gobbled them up, and I was a happy girl until I got smart and I read, And I understood that when you have synthetic ingredients, and that's what these little cookies had, when you have synthetic ingredients and you're introducing synthetic products into your system that your body doesn't know how to handle. All right. So yay for the Italian government of saying, no, we're not going to do this. They're also going to be banning insect flour. Now, I had to do some research on this because, yes, I know John the Baptist did honey and locusts, and God bless him. You know, he did that. I don't particularly want to eat a bug. I know that our FDA rules say that you can have no more than 2 bugs in a processed item, so they're yay for that. Okay, but I do not want to consume bugs. I don't want to consume locusts. There are mealy worms. There's other kind of grub worms and different things that people are experimenting with, and they're saying that by, I think it's 2030, maybe 2050, I can't remember exactly the date, that by that time, meat as we know it will be unsustainable. Personally, I don't believe it. I think it's just like all the other scare tactics that they give us, right? I don't believe it. But I certainly don't want to be making bread or cake, which honestly, I don't do that very much anymore. However, if I were going to do that, I would not want my flour to be of insect flour. When I was doing my research, I was reading all about the different ways that they have to take the insect, process it, extrude it, and all that kind. I mean, it's just a lot of mess that they have to go through. They have to defat it. They have to do all kinds of things. And I'm just saying, well, we're not supposed to eat bugs anyway. You know, I know locusts are okay. I don't want to do it. All right. So in the Italian Parliament, they're going through these procedures right now to ban this kind of food. All right. We know that the human genome contains hundreds of genes that it has acquired horizontally from other sources than our parents or our ancestors, such as bacteria and virus. And in the reports, the subsequent reports that I read, there was actual proof that we do have fragments of DNA from bacteria and viruses and fungus in our systems. And this is how we get sick when our GI tract is compromised and those fragments go from where they're supposed to be into the bloodstream where they are not supposed to be. The article says we don't really know how this has happened, but we know that it has, and what it means with eating immortalized cell lines. Complete genes have been shown to pass from the food we eat into our blood. So if they're positing the question, if we eat immortalized cell lines, those cells that have no programmed cell death, would they move into different cells in our own bodies and predispose them to become cancerous? That's the question. All right. The research has been shown that horizontal gene transfer is a central part of the progression of cancer. So there is that has been proven. We get cancer from what we eat. We get cancer from absorbing contaminants in the environment. And so we need to really think about, do we want to ingest immortalized cells that never die, right? I was looking at another report, and it was talking about cancer cells and how cancer cells, through a mechanism, and I can't go into all of it because it'd just be too long for this program, but the cancer cells have some mechanism whereby they excrete different enzymes and particles into healthy cells next door to it that absorb that, and they clump together and they become a cancerous tumor. Now, we know in most cases it takes about 10 to 15 years for a cancer cell to actually produce a tumor that can be detected at your doctor's office, right? But I don't want to find that out. I don't want to be eating processed, synthetic processed lab-grown meat with immortalized cells, and if that could be pushed out of that cell into my own cells, and my own cells would be possibly more, prone to develop cancer there. So we know that cancers come from what we eat. Cancers create bubbles, otherwise known as exosomes, by which means they can transfer genetic material to healthy cells and turn them cancerous. There's absolutely no reason to doubt then that cancer-causing genes in lab-grown meat, otherwise known as oncogenes, could be taken up into the genome of the eater, potentially anywhere in the body with disastrous effects. So, why are we doing this without any long-term studies? Well, we know, follow the money, right? It's all about the money. People want to have a return on their investment. They've invested big dollars in order to learn how to do lab-grown meat, learn how to produce it, and they want to have a return on their investment. Aspartame, we know that aspartame has been approved by the Food and Drug Administration for a very long time. In the past couple of months, they've come out and said this is a cancer-causing substance. Same thing with sucralose. Sucralose is still on the market, and it has been FDA approved, but we now know, and we did a program on this a few months back, that sucralose causes your DNA to mutate, and not in a good way. And so, these are some things that have been approved by the FDA, and then years later they unapprove them, or more research comes out that shows that they're not all they're cracked up to be, okay? We know that aspartame has been implicated in brain cancer. So you want to look at your ingredients. If it has NutraSweet, if it has aspartame, it can cross the blood-brain barrier. If you eat lunch meat that has a lot of nitrates in it, or you consume pizza, which is the same, it is the perfect combination for brain cancer. So we need to be really, really wise about what we're doing, right? We just need to be wise about that. So aspartame, high fructose corn syrup, or genetically modified crops, all of these have been approved because of the financial stake, right, that the corporations have. And the big lobbies here in the United States put pressure on our politicians in order for these things to be approved, right? We know that aspartame and other artificial sweeteners cause cancer and sterility. And so we see a lot in our clinic, we see a lot of infertile women, and we know it's because of what they are eating. Now, all of these things have been approved by the FDA, but we are coming out with more and more information that these things are causing all of these problems here, okay? The genetically modified foods is on a ratio of 1-to-1 directly responsible for the obesity epidemic that we have here in the United States, okay? Our environment is now bathed in harmful chemicals, especially but not exclusively chemicals related to plastics, because we have allowed ourselves to become totally addicted to them long before we knew of the mistakes that we have made. More than 2,400 chemicals of potential concern have been identified in plastics, right? And all of this leads to infertility. So that's a lot of information. There are some links that I'm going to drop in below here, so you can do some further reading if you want to do that. But I'm going to kind of channel Nancy Reagan, just say no to cultured meat, okay? If you want to eat meat, but eat meat that grew and was produced the natural way, okay? If you've got a conscientious objection against eating meat, that's fine. Don't eat meat. But I want you to think long and hard before you start consuming lab-grown meat or cultured meat, because you really don't know what you're getting, and you really don't know how your body's going to respond to that. And it may be that you are introducing some serious DNA into your system. So that's a lot. It is the weekend, and I always say get out and do some self-care, get away from your normal routine, refresh, relax, restore, all those things, and I will see you next week.